20 years instead of an entire lifetime behind bars. That's the demand of the man who was convicted for masterminding the murder of Tshegofatso Pule. Ntuthuko Shoba is in court today, appealing to the judge's good character for a lighter sentence. A final decision and judgment will be heard when he appears once more tomorrow. eNCA reporter Slindelo Masikane following the court developments. Let's go to her now live for the latest updates. Good afternoon, Slindelo. Thanks for joining us on today. What happened in court?
Well, what we saw in court today, Bradan, was the mitigation and aggravation of sentencing arguments. We understood today that all the pre-sentencing reports had been completed, but there was a possibility that maybe some witnesses would be called for some clarity, either by the judge or by the state and the defense. But what we saw essentially, the crux of what happened today were those arguments, closing arguments being presented by the state and Shoba's lawyers. In particular, Norman Makubela for Ntuthuko Shoba, he argued in terms of mitigation of sentencing that just because Ntuthuko Shoba maintains his innocence, that he did not plead guilty should not count against him, because all he was doing there was basically exercising his constitutional rights. Also pointing out to the courts that a lack of remorse should also not aggravate in terms of his sentence, but also arguing really that Ntuthuko Shoba should be given a sentence of 20 years equal to the one in which convicted killer Muskaise Malepane had received, saying that because they've been convicted of the same crime, then there should not be any difference in terms of the sentencing that they received. But then, of course, the state countered this by aggravating the reasons for a much harsher, or should I say, the prescribed minimum sentence of life in prison, saying that Ntuthuko Shoba was the mastermind behind Tshegofatso Pule's murder, that it should count against him that he has shown no remorse. Up until this day, he's been quite emotionless, really, in court, also saying to the court that his particular matter and the one of the convicted killer are two different scenarios altogether, because with the convicted killer, he confessed to the crime and pleaded guilty and has actually asked the family for forgiveness. And so the state was then asking the court to take into account that this was a contract killing, which is the most aggravating reason to give him life in prison, but also the fact that Tshegofatso Pule was 8 months pregnant with his baby. She falls under a group that the court regards as being quite vulnerable, but also pointing out to the court that it shouldn't forget that Ntuthuko Shoba literally handed Tshegofatso over to her killer.
The accused decided and chose to exercise his constitutional options when confronted with the legal who's at hand at the time.
So just to round off that submission, unless you have anything else to say, you identify as another substantial and compelling circumstance,
as it may please the court,
the need to ensure uniformity and proportionality between different perpetrators of the same offence.
Or the same offence, even if they have been tried separately.
If you say Mr. Malapane's guilty plea shouldn't come into it?
Even if it does come to it, it does not make him any less guilty and any less of a participant to what eventually happened. And
it might have been a substantial and compelling circumstance which doesn't exist in this case. That's what I'm trying to get at.
The fact that he pleaded guilty, but the fact that the accused pleaded not guilty shouldn't be seen as a negative. He is exercising his constitutional prerogative in the circumstances.
Slindelo, I understand you also managed to speak to the family of Tshegofatso. How are they feeling at this point of the trial? It's almost at its end point.
I think you can see the anxiety certainly there, because at this point it's yet another waiting game in terms of a couple of more hours until they find out exactly what sentence Shoba is going to receive, but also quite angered and annoyed at the arguments that were put forward by Ntuthuko Shoba's lawyers. They feel quite insulted, really, with the fact that Ntuthuko Shoba believes that he should not get the prescribed minimum sentence when he was the one who orchestrated the entire murder, when he was the one who planned Pule's murder, and even got the killer himself even going into detail as to how he wants Pule to be killed. So for them, they believe that in order for justice really to be served, Bradan, then Ntuthuko Shoba needs to get nothing less than life in prison. Let's take a listen.
To date, when you took a look at Mr. Shoba's case, it is quite distinctly from that one of Mr. Malepat. He still maintains his innocence with regards to this whole ordeal, but at the same time, he wants to paint himself as this person was traumatized because of the killing of Tshegofatso. We cannot take that, and we cannot accept that as a family. We're still saying, we still maintain as a family that he deserves a life sentence. I think it even makes our emotions more boiling to the extent that despite the fact of what was proven in court, he still maintains his innocence. The only thing that comes to my mind is just those are the tendencies of what you can call a psychopath. That's the only thing that can come to my mind.
And of course, when we resume tomorrow, you're expecting nothing less than a life imprisonment sentence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly what would satisfy us as a family. It's not going to bring back Tshegofatso, but it will at least help us to come to the nearest closure that we've always been hoping for.
And what about the foundation that's named after Tshegofatso? Any response to what's happening in court?
Well, for the past couple of months now, that particular foundation has been running a campaign calling actually for 2 life sentences to be served against Ntuthuko Shoba, that he didn't just kill Tshegofatso Pule, but he also murdered her baby as well, and that the family has been robbed of 2 lives in this particular matter. And so I think for the foundation itself as well, they are hoping that the prescribed minimum of at least life in prison will be what's handed down to Ntuthuko Shoba tomorrow. So let's take a listen to one of the representatives from that foundation.
I think that was the most shocking and the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, especially when when they were going on about how it will actually affect his rehabilitation process. For me, I sit here and I'm like, how about when he sat and he started ridiculing Tshegofatso even beyond death, when he was minimizing how her intellectual was so low and all of that. I mean, he did so many things during the trial that made sure that he continued to tarnish her name even in death. So for us, it doesn't really matter. It's whether he feels that he's gonna. We were expecting that there would be an ace up his sleeve as always. I mean, if he didn't do that, it would really not be his true nature. From inception, he's always had an ace up his sleeve. We were expecting this, but I'm so glad that it was countered with the fact that there was no remorse ever, and there's nothing really that would make us feel that he's deserving of anything less. In fact, we still stand on what we've been pushing, our hashtag, harsher sentences, and we want a life for Kamano and a life for Tshegofatso.
So what's next now, Slindelo, in this final stages of the court case? Back tomorrow?
We're back tomorrow, Bradan, at around noon. So definitely by this time tomorrow, Ntuthuko Shoba will know his fate. At this moment right now, what the judge is doing is deliberating over the arguments that he's heard and essentially trying to make a decision on whether he's going to deviate from the prescribed minimum sentence of life in prison or whether he will be handing that particular sentence down. So that is what we're currently waiting for. But definitely tomorrow, this time, we will know, and Shoba will know exactly what his fate will be.